It was supposed to be the happiest weekend of Karen's life. A Friday morning dipped in soft light, birds chirping outside her apartment window, the smell of vanilla creamer still lingering in her travel mug. She wore her favorite oversized white sweatshirt, the one that said "Future Mrs. Harland" across the front in sparkly rose gold letters. Her hair was still a little damp from the shower, no makeup, no stress. Just a soft, natural smile as she walked into the office, the same office she had worked in for nearly 5 years. It was supposed to be her final walkthrough before the wedding. Just a few minutes to check emails, sign off some tasks, and leave a thank you note for her team. She wasn't even planning to sit down. All her real thoughts were elsewhere. Would the florist remember she hated baby's breath? Did the band confirm no Ed Sheeran on the playlist? Did Ethan remember to pick up the rings? Karen was already halfway out of the corporate world and into a life that felt like it was about to bloom. She had earned this peace, this joy. But peace has a funny way of evaporating when the air pressure changes. She walked down the hallway with a bounce in her step, nodding to colleagues who waved at her, some teasing her with "Mrs. Harland" in cheerful tones. Karen smiled. She waved back. But when she turned the corner to HR, her steps slowed. The door was already slightly open. Light poured from inside like it was trying to escape. And there he was, Rick, sitting in the corner of the HR office like a gargoyle dressed in discount cologne. He didn't wave, didn't even look up, just shuffled papers with forced indifference. Karen paused at the doorway. Something inside her stirred. It wasn't fear. Not yet. Just something off, like a wrong note in a perfect song. She stepped in, still trying to keep the smile on her face. "Morning," she said gently. Rick glanced up. Finally. He smiled, if you could call it that. A stretched, fake grin that looked more like a wince than a welcome. "Hey, Karen, thanks for coming in." And right then, she knew. She didn't know what, exactly, but she knew with the same quiet instinct women carry like armor that something wasn't right. This wasn't a celebration. It wasn't a courtesy send-off. This was something else, something surgical, something sharpened behind closed doors. And she had just stepped into the middle of it. Rick didn't look her in the eye at first. He adjusted his tie, unnecessarily, flipped a page in the manila folder like this was a routine quarterly review, then finally leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of someone who'd already rehearsed every word. "So, I'll just cut to it." Karen blinked. She could feel her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "We're going to have to let you go." Silence. Those 7 words didn't land like a sentence. They landed like a slap, like ice water poured down her spine while she was still wearing her bridal sweatshirt. Karen stared at him, unblinking. "I'm sorry, what?" Rick cleared his throat, still pretending this wasn't a betrayal, still acting like this was business, not brutality. "I'm sorry, what?" Rick cleared his throat, still pretending this wasn't a betrayal, still acting like this was business, not brutality. "It's not personal," he added, like that softened the knife. "It's a timing thing. Budget restructuring. You know how it goes." No, she didn't. And even if she did, this wasn't it. She wasn't a temp. She wasn't underperforming. She wasn't even in a department that had been flagged for cuts. She was one single day from her bonus vesting, $27,000, money she had earned, worked late for, skipped vacations for. Gone. Karen didn't say a word. She just looked at Rick. He smiled again, that same waxy, insincere grin that people wear when they're stabbing you and pretending it's a hug. She wasn't in HR. She was in a corporate execution chamber, and the firing squad wore business casual. And then it hit her. Not immediately, not as Rick was rattling on about budget alignment and corporate restructuring like he was reading from a board-approved script, but in the moment between one breath and the next, Karen remembered the date. Tomorrow was May 4th, Saturday, her bonus. $27,000 pre-tax. It was set to vest at exactly 12:01 a.m. on May 4th. That meant if she had made it through this one last day, if she had stayed employed just 24 more hours, the money would have been hers. Money she'd earned over the course of a brutal year. Deadlines, crises, back-to-back client reports. She even worked through Christmas week when half the company was out. That bonus was hers, until Rick decided otherwise. This wasn't about budget. This wasn't about timing. This was calculated betrayal. Surgical, deliberate, and so well-timed it almost looked legal. Karen's body didn't move, but inside her, something snapped. Something fundamental. Not rage, not even tears. Just the cold, clear click of realization that she had been targeted, that someone had watched the calendar just as closely as she had, only not to celebrate her, but to sabotage her. And Rick, he knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. He waited for the last possible moment, the Friday before a holiday weekend, before a wedding, before a bonus could be claimed. Karen sat there frozen, not by weakness, but by the weight of knowing. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even speak. She just stared straight through Rick, like she could see the spreadsheet where he'd already moved her name into the savings column. The vineyard was glowing. Golden string lights draped from oak trees like wedding day halos. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter spilled across linen-covered tables. Candles flickered in glass vases like tiny beating hearts. It was the perfect rehearsal dinner. And Karen, she was the perfect bride. On the outside, anyway. She smiled for photos. She raised toasts. She hugged family members who flew in from out of state. She laughed at Ethan's dad jokes, nodded at the caterer's final checklist, and pretended everything was exactly the way she dreamed it would be. But inside, Karen was unraveling. Every sound felt too loud. Every compliment too sharp. "This is your weekend, sweetheart. You're glowing. You look so happy." She smiled, always smiled, but her heart, it was broken into 1,000 careful, silent pieces. She sat beneath the fairy lights, sipping wine that tasted like ashes, wondering how no one could see it. Her mom, tipsy and crying with joy, oblivious. Her best friend Naomi, busy bossing the staff around, focused. Ethan, laughing with his friends, eyes shining. No one knew, no one saw it, that beneath the makeup and the white dress, Karen was playing a role. The role of a woman about to get everything she ever wanted. When in truth, she had just lost something she worked her entire career to earn. And the worst part, she couldn't even tell them. Not yet. Not tonight. She couldn't throw her heartbreak across the table like a dropped dish. She had to hold it in, because she didn't want to ruin the one thing Rick hadn't stolen, her wedding. No one knew. Not her mother, who was already 2 glasses in and crying happy tears over the shrimp cocktail. Not Naomi, her best friend, her ride or die, who was too busy obsessing over charger plates and shrimp to skewer ratios. And not Ethan, especially not Ethan, the man she was marrying in less than 24 hours, the man whose name she would take, the man who kept giving her soft, sideways glances across the room, like they were sharing a secret joke no one else could hear. She hadn't told him. She couldn't. Because how do you say, "Hey babe, I just got fired this morning by a man who stole $27,000 from me"? But let's cut the cake. How do you take something so cruel, so calculated, and pour it into the middle of a table set for celebration? She couldn't do that. Not to Ethan, not to herself. So she smiled, again, and again, and again. Every smile was a mask. Every laugh was choreography. She was dancing in a war zone, pretending the landmines didn't exist. And in doing that, she wasn't just hiding the truth from the people she loved. She was starting to hide it from herself, convincing herself for a moment that maybe it wasn't that bad, that maybe she could just let it go, be the bigger person. But deep down, under the dress and the mascara and the sparkle, she knew the truth. This wasn't something you walk away from. This was something you circle back to. And when you do, you come sharper, quieter, and far more dangerous. It was around 10 p.m. The wine had dulled, the band had mellowed into a jazzy background hum. Karen slipped away quietly. No one noticed. They were too busy dancing, drinking, making toasts, and stealing desserts. She ducked into the powder room, locked the door behind her, sat on the marble counter in her rehearsal dress, a silky white thing that now felt like a costume more than a promise. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She opened her email, searched her contract, and there it was, plain, cold, undeniable. Annual performance bonus to vest on the first Saturday of May. Termination prior to this date results in forfeiture of payout. That was tomorrow, the first Saturday of May. Rick hadn't just let her go. He had waited. He had planned this. He had stalked the calendar like a wolf and pulled the trigger exactly when it would hurt the most and protect him the best. This wasn't corporate policy. This was calculated cruelty. Karen stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Not from sadness anymore. No, this wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. Cold, focused, steady. She saw it all now. The timing, the language Rick used, the fake sympathy, the smug detachment. It was never personal, that's what he said. But it was precise. And in some ways, that was worse, because it meant this wasn't an accident, it was a system. A game designed to exploit people who wouldn't fight back. But Karen, she wasn't one of those people. Not anymore. She locked her phone, slid off the counter, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes weren't soft anymore. They weren't hurt. They were sharp. Sharper than Rick ever expected. The wedding reception glowed like a dream. Karen stood near the edge of the dance floor, a slice of cake in one hand, a glass of champagne in the other. Her dress shimmered under the string lights. She looked radiant. But inside, she was steel. Next to her stood Robert Harland, the man, the name, the storm in a three-piece suit, CEO of Harland Systems, multi-billion-dollar empire, a man whose calendar had its own gravity. And tonight, he was simply Dad. He watched Ethan, his son, laughing on the dance floor with his groomsman's sweat-streaked tie undone, dancing terribly. Robert smiled, and Karen turned toward him. Just slightly. Just enough. I got fired yesterday, she said. Calm. Even. As if she were talking about the weather. Robert didn't react at first. He didn't blink. So she continued. Rick let me go, Friday morning. Said it was a budget thing. She sipped her champagne, quietly. My bonus, 27 grand, was set to vest Saturday. He knew. He waited. Still, Robert said nothing. His eyes, however, shifted. Sharp. Calculating. Mechanical. The eyes of a man who didn't waste words, only moved pieces. And you didn't tell Ethan? He asked eventually. Karen shook her head. No, I didn't want to ruin this. Another beat of silence. The music carried on. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Robert looked toward the dance floor. Ethan was now attempting a clumsy air guitar solo. He exhaled once through his nose, swirled his scotch, then said, I'll make a note. That was it. 4 words. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Not even comforting. But Karen understood, because Robert Harland doesn't make notes. He rewrites contracts. He moves millions. He ends legacies. And in that moment, standing beneath fairy lights and wedding music, Karen didn't need revenge. She just needed someone to remember. And now, someone did. Karen didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She didn't whisper with bitterness or theatrics. She just said it. Rick fired me yesterday. Bonus was supposed to vest Saturday, $27,000. Each sentence landed like a quiet bomb. Not explosive, but exact. Robert didn't ask for details, he didn't ask for proof, he didn't need to. Because powerful people don't need drama, they need information. And what Karen gave him was perfect. No emotional outbursts, no begging, no "can you fix this for me?" Just data, delivered with poise, a firing, a date, a number. And in that simplicity lay the storm. Robert took a sip of his scotch, didn't speak, didn't move, but behind his stillness you could feel something shifting, a calculation, a tab being opened, a scoreboard being updated. Karen didn't say more. She didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is say exactly enough and walk away. Robert took another sip of scotch. Karen stayed silent, no follow-up, no clarification, just air thick with tension and understanding. Finally, after a long, almost meditative pause, Robert turned slightly toward her and said, "I'll make a note." That was it. Just 4 words, soft, clean, measured. Not a promise, not a vow, not even a reaction. But Robert Harland doesn't make notes like other men. He doesn't jot things down to forget. He doesn't keep mental sticky notes out of courtesy. When Robert Harland says, "I'll make a note," what he means is, "I've already made a move." What he means is a file just opened inside my head, and someone's about to be reviewed. Karen didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to, because this wasn't a favor. It was an activation. There was no warmth in Robert's tone, but there was weight, and weight moves systems. In that moment, Karen felt something stir in her chest. Not relief, not revenge, just possibility. Because power, real power, doesn't raise its voice. It takes notes. Karen didn't board a plane. She didn't sip cocktails on a beach. Didn't pose for honeymoon photos or post a single hashtag. The passport stayed in a drawer. The suitcase remained by the front door unopened. Instead, she stayed home. Still in her wedding robe, still finding bobby pins tangled in her hair, still smelling like roses and leftover champagne. But her mind, it was already back in the boardroom. Not physically, not legally, but she was there in every Slack message. Every email thread, every nervous glance exchanged behind glass-walled conference rooms. She watched, silently, strategically, refreshed the org chart twice an hour, browsed LinkedIn with the eyes of a hawk, and waited, not for revenge, but for movement. Because once Robert made his note, Karen knew something would happen. She just didn't know when or how hard it would hit. The office buzzed on like usual. Rick posted a photo of himself on LinkedIn the next morning, smiling. Donuts in hand. Captioned, "Leadership means making the tough calls." Karen stared at the screen. No anger, no eye rolls, just observation. "You have no idea," she thought. "You still think this is yours to control." But it wasn't, not anymore. The cracks didn't explode. They whispered. It started on Tuesday. Just whispers in the break room, odd Slack statuses, quick glances between team leads. Then, an email from the VP of Finance. Subject line, urgent, audit request. All vendor transactions tied to Harlan Systems flagged. Every line item from the past 18 months. Pulled, reviewed, scrutinized. By Wednesday morning, legal was in back-to-back meetings. Quiet ones. Doors shut, blinds drawn. HR walked slower, talked less. Slack threads began disappearing or being screenshot. People noticed. They always do. But no one said Karen's name. Not out loud. She was gone, after all. Officially prioritizing her personal life. That was Rick's spin. He told people she had checked out, that she wasn't performing, that the departure was mutual. But something didn't sit right. Because if it was mutual, why was legal now pulling Slack conversations from April? Why was finance chasing expense reports with highlighters? And why was Rick suddenly tense? He started snapping at interns, double-checking his own emails, staying late. The man who strutted with donuts 2 days ago was now chewing mints like medication. And Karen, still home, still silent, watching, waiting, smiling just a little, because the tremors weren't random. They were consequences. Rick strutted into the office like a man who won, box of donuts in one hand, smug grin in the other. "Glazed or cinnamon?" he asked the receptionist, as if the world hadn't shifted under his feet. People laughed, politely. They always do when the devil still signs their checks. To Rick, the storm had passed. Karen was gone. No screaming, no lawsuits, no HR meltdown. He thought it was over. But it wasn't. It was beginning. Behind the scenes, Robert Harland wasn't shouting. He was dialing. His lawyers, his compliance team, and a private audit firm whose job was to sniff out rot quietly. They started digging into Rick, into vendor chains, into bonus timing patterns, into the oddity of 6 employees in 1 year missing their vesting dates by exactly 1 day. 1 day. It was like watching a water heater hiss. The pressure building, the bolts loosening, and Rick still pouring coffee, still bragging in meetings, still planning the next quarter like his seat wasn't about to collapse. He had no idea the temperature was rising, not until it was too late. On Monday morning, Karen received an email. Subject line, Harlan Systems Strategic Partners Conference, VIP access. No explanation, no note from Robert, no "we'd love to have you" fluff, just a calendar invite, a personal access code. And a seating assignment, front row, VIP section, directly facing the stage. Karen stared at it for a moment, uncertain if it was a mistake. After all, she was no longer affiliated, no longer employed, technically not even a partner. But this seat, this invitation, it wasn't about status. It was about witnessing. Someone wanted her there. Someone powerful, not to participate, but to watch. To watch what? She didn't know yet, but her instincts whispered, "Show up, sit down, and stay quiet." So she accepted the invite, no questions asked, and as she clicked confirm, her heartbeat shifted from broken to prepared. Something was coming, and she was being positioned to see it up close. Karen didn't reply to the invitation, didn't call to confirm, didn't ask who sent it. She just prepared. That morning, she stood in front of the mirror, calm, collected, calculated. She didn't wear something loud. She didn't need to. Instead, she chose a deep navy pantsuit, crisp and razor-cut, simple black heels, hair slicked back with precision, eyes lined like a shield. She looked unapologetic, not a victim, not a guest, but someone you regret crossing. She wasn't here for vengeance. She wasn't even here for validation. She was here for alignment, to be in the right place at the right moment, to witness the right fall. As she adjusted her watch, she whispered to herself, "If I'm a piece on his board, I'm going to be the queen." And queens don't chase checkmates. They watch others walk into them. The ballroom lights dimmed. Spotlights bathed the stage in gold. Then applause erupted. Rick strolled out, confident, cocky, clapping along like a showman. And there she was, front row, Karen, back straight, arms crossed, face still as stone. Their eyes met. Rick blinked, surprised, then smirked. "Look who showed up," he muttered under his breath to the VP beside him. And then, loud enough for the microphone to catch, "Firing her proved I can make tough calls." Some laughed politely. Others stiffened. Karen didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't raise a brow. She simply tilted her head and smiled. Not a mocking smile, not sad, not bitter, just calm, unbothered, as if she'd seen the ending already, and it didn't end with him. In that silence, Rick kept talking, kept presenting, kept selling himself, but something shifted in the room. The lights were still on him, but the gravity had shifted to her. The applause for Rick had barely faded when the room hushed. Then a different kind of energy swept in. Not excitement, not anticipation. Weight. Heavy. Palpable. From the side of the stage, Robert Harland emerged. No music, no pomp, no dramatic lighting, just a tailored navy suit and a presence that sucked the air out of the room. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply walked to the podium, placed both hands on the edges, and looked up. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us." His voice was calm, almost warm, but laced with iron. "I stand before you not only as CEO of Harlan Systems, but as someone who believes integrity is not optional." Silence. No one whispered. No one blinked. Recent actions by a certain vendor have called that integrity into question. He didn't name Rick. He didn't have to. When loyalty is met with betrayal, when rules are weaponized against the very people who uphold them, we are forced to respond. Karen sat still watching. Rick shifted in his chair sweating. Which is why, effective immediately, Harlan Systems will be terminating our contract previously valued at $20 million. A sharp inhale, a collective jolt. We will be pursuing new partnerships aligned with our values. This decision is final. Then he nodded once and stepped back. Applause didn't come immediately, because everyone was still processing what had just happened. A keynote had become a verdict. Effective immediately, we are terminating our contract with Stratton and Chase. There it was, the sentence. Short, measured, but it landed like a missile. Rick blinked. For a second, he thought he'd misheard. Then heads turned. Dozens. Eyes darted between Robert and him. His throat tightened. He felt it before he could stop it, the cold, sinking panic crawling into his spine. Karen didn't move. She didn't flinch. Just sat still in her front row seat, hands resting gently on her lap. Rick stood up. Maybe to protest, maybe to explain, maybe to survive. But Robert had already stepped off the stage. The screen behind him now displayed a single slide. Real leadership. Real integrity. Rick's knees buckled. He collapsed into his chair. His assistant whispered something, but he didn't hear. The air was roaring. 20 million. Gone. With one sentence. The room didn't gasp. The room didn't cheer. Because this wasn't theater. It was judgment. And judgment, when done right, is silent and final. Rick didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move. His eyes were wide open, like a man who'd seen a ghost walk into the room and sit down right beside him. The wine glass slipped from his fingers. No smash. Just a dull clink as it rolled off the table and onto the plush carpet. Silence. Even the murmur in the crowd had faded. They weren't watching Robert anymore. They were watching Rick. The man who once boasted he could make hard decisions now looked like he couldn't decide how to inhale. His jaw tightened, then slackened, then froze again. He reached for his phone, but his hand stopped midway. He knew. Everyone knew. There were no calls to make, no one to rescue him. Karen stood slowly. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The look on his face was enough. A mix of disbelief, dread, and something else. Recognition. He finally recognized her power too late. Robert Harlan stepped off the stage. No fist-pounding, no gloating, no declaration of war. Just a firm, quiet exit, the kind only men of true power can make. He walked through the stunned room, a sea of gasps and murmurs parting before him like waves. And as he passed Karen, he stopped, placed a single hand on her shoulder, just one. Not a hug, not a speech, not even eye contact. Just that touch. Deliberate, public, enough. Karen didn't move. She didn't need to, because in that moment, every executive, every investor, every wide-eyed bystander in the hall knew the truth. This wasn't about budget. This wasn't about restructuring. This was retribution. And the one who had been wronged was sitting quietly, spine straight, eyes steady. No one said her name, but everyone knew it. Security didn't rush. They didn't need to. Rick Stratton didn't scream. He didn't flail or deny or beg. He stood frozen, eyes darting, sweat glistening on his brow. Two uniformed officers approached quietly, professionally, not with hostility, but with certainty. One reached for his lanyard. The plastic name badge, VP Stratton and Chase, was unclipped in a single clean motion. No resistance, no last words, only silence, and the sound of polished shoes on marble as Rick was escorted down the aisle. Guests shifted in their chairs, unsure whether to look or look away. Karen didn't turn her head. She didn't need to, because his reign was already over. The man who once held meetings with folded arms and smug smiles was now just a man with no name, no title, no future. She didn't storm out. She didn't raise her fist. She simply stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked. Not a word, not a smirk. The silence in the room was thunderous. A kind of hush that doesn't ask questions because it already knows the answer. No one dared look her in the eye, yet every eye followed her. The same woman Rick thought was disposable. The same woman who was fired to save a bonus check now walked through a sea of industry titans and left behind a story that would be whispered in boardrooms for years. She didn't win by shouting. She won by knowing exactly when to speak and to whom. As the doors closed behind her, a chill ran through the room. Not fear, but reverence. Karen didn't just walk out of that hall. She ascended. One whisper, one ruthless firing, and $20 million gone. Rick thought he was clever. He thought $27,000 was worth a betrayal. But what he didn't see, what he never saw, was that Karen's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. He mistook her quiet for weakness, but her silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, sharp, precise. And when the moment came, it cut through everything. Rick tried to steal $27,000 from me. It cost him $20 million. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when someone who's been underestimated decides not to shout, but to show. No threats, no drama, just one simple truth. Never underestimate the power of someone who chooses silence until the silence speaks. The power of silent strength. Not everyone who stays silent is weak. Sometimes the right kind of silence is the sharpest weapon you have. When you're underestimated or treated unfairly, don't rush to react with anger or frustration. Stay calm, observe closely, and prepare yourself for the moment when you can show your true power. Silence isn't surrender. It's a strategic move toward ultimate victory. If Karen's story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button to show your support. Make sure to subscribe to Through Her Eyes for more real stories packed with strength and life lessons. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a video that helps you live stronger and smarter every week.